For monks set out on a journey, ascending a steep mountain path that twisted and turned through the lush greenery. The air was crisp, the sun shone brilliantly overhead, and the sound of their footsteps harmonized with the gentle rustling of leaves. Each monk carried within him a yearning for wisdom and a deeper understanding of life. Their hearts were open. They were determined to find enlightenment. As they climbed higher, they found themselves faced with an unexpected obstacle. A gigantic boulder lay directly in the center of the path, towering and imposing. It blocked their way completely. The monks stood before it in silence, contemplating their next move. The first monk, eager and full of youthful energy, stepped forward with determination. He placed his hands on the cold surface of the boulder and pushed with all his might. His muscles strained and his face reddened as he exerted his strength, but the boulder did not budge. Confused and frustrated, he stepped back and wiped the sweat off his brow. "Every great challenge has a solution," he muttered, but his confidence waned. The second monk observed this and felt an urge to prove his own strength. With a deep breath, he charged at the boulder and pushed with all of his energy. He grunted and strained, but just like the first, he was met with the unyielding stone. He too stepped back, a frown creasing his forehead. The third monk, a bit older and more experienced, approached the boulder with a sense of intellectual curiosity. He examined it closely, walked around it, and considered its shape, weighing his options. He then decided to push, but his efforts were met with the same fate, failure. He too had to admit defeat. The weight of the boulder far too much for brute force or clever thinking alone. Finally, the fourth monk, a figure of serenity and composure, approached the boulder. He observed his companions, then quietly surveyed the landscape around them. He noticed the trees lining the path, the contours of the ground, and the breeze that swirled in gentle caresses. Instead of rushing to action, he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, centering himself within the moment. After a moment of stillness, he opened his eyes and spoke softly. "Perhaps there is a different way to move this boulder." His fellow monks watched curiously as he sat down cross-legged in front of the obstacle. Instead of pushing against it, he reached out and touched the cool stone with his hand. "What are you doing?" the first monk exclaimed, bewildered by the apparent inaction. "We need to move it, not sit here." The fourth monk simply smiled and said, "Sometimes by stepping back, we can see a clearer path forward. This boulder does not need to be destroyed. It needs to be understood." With calm resolve, he began to meditate in front of the boulder. As he breathed in and out slowly, the sounds of the forest enveloped them. His fellow monks hesitated, unsure of what to do, until they too were drawn into the tranquility that surrounded the fourth monk. They sat down, albeit restlessly, aligning their minds alongside his. As time passed, they began to embrace a different perspective. The fourth monk remained in quiet meditation and eventually lifted his arm to point toward the side of the boulder, revealing a small but clear gap where they could pass. "Look," he said softly, "we don't always have to confront our obstacles directly. Sometimes the way through is to the side." The other monks looked to where he pointed and gasped in realization. They had been so focused on the boulder itself that they had failed to see there was a clear path around it. One by one, they made their way through the small opening and continued their journey up the mountain, now enlightened by the experience. As they proceeded, the first monk, filled with newfound understanding, turned to the fourth monk. "How did you know to look beyond the boulder? You didn't even attempt to move it." The fourth monk smiled gently. "It is not always about overcoming our obstacles with brute force. Often, we must listen and observe. Immense strength can cloud our judgment, while stillness allows us clarity. Enlightenment often lies in recognizing that the solution may be waiting just off the beaten path." "Indeed," added the second monk, the traces of his initial frustration fading. "Life will place various boulders in our way, but in remaining attentive to our surroundings, we can find ways to circumvent the challenges we face." The third monk nodded, absorbing the wisdom shared. "And we must remember that every experience, whether it appears as a challenge or an opportunity, is a lesson in disguise. Each moment can teach us about patience, humility, and the importance of perspective. The boulder may have appeared as a barrier, yet it led us to a significant revelation." The four monks continued their journey up the mountain, each carrying within them a piece of enlightenment, a new understanding of how to approach challenges. They communicated openly, shared their thoughts, and enjoyed the beauty that surrounded them. As they reached the mountain's peak, they paused to take in the magnificent view that spread before them. Vast valleys, shimmering rivers, and distant peaks undulated in waves of green and gold under the sun. It was a sight that promised serenity and adventure in equal measure. Standing together, they reflected on their journey. The first monk spoke up, "We've traveled far and learned much about ourselves." What began as a simple obstacle transformed into a meaningful lesson. The second monk added, "It reminds us that life is filled with boulders, and it is how we encounter them that defines our path." The third monk smiled, saying, "Though there may be moments of frustration, it is essential to remain patient and open to all possibilities. Only then can we find our way through without unnecessary struggle." Finally, the fourth monk, who had led them to this moment of insight, spoke softly, "Every challenge we face has its teachings. Reflecting on our responses can illuminate hidden wisdom and allow us to grow. Let us carry this understanding with us and become beacons of light for those who may find themselves before their own boulders." As they stood on that mountain, enriched by their shared experience, the monks embraced the idea that obstacles are not merely hindrances but invitations to grow, to shift our perspectives, and to learn to navigate life with grace. Let this story remind us all that life presents us with challenges not to weigh us down, but to propel us forward into exploration and self-discovery. We grow wiser through our struggles when we take a moment to pause, reflect, and approach our challenges with openness. It is this journey of understanding ourselves and the world around us that truly illuminates the path to enlightenment. Balance, patience, and a fresh perspective will guide us through even the greatest boulders life places in our path.